So thanks for having me, and thanks, Lori, for inviting me. I'm kind of working this presentation in collaboration with Judd Kratzer, who will be coming up next, really talking about strategic wood additions. And I'll be covering really why we do this so much in New England, what some of the stream limitations we've been having up here, covering what is strategic wood addition, how we've been implementing it, and how we've kind of been expanding out into some other types of low-tech process-based restoration techniques, including Beaver Dam Analogs and post-assisted log jams. So I feel like everybody is very familiar with the typical calendar-ready New England stream, very straightened, very bouldery. There's, great photogenic properties, but it's terrible for actual trout. Generally, there's been some previous Forest Service modeling that suggests that up to 170 to 210 pieces of large wood per mile, based on other old growth forests, is what we kind of should be seeing in New England streams. However, the historical context of former logging, agriculture, everything like that has taken a lot of that way through the majority of New England streams. Working with Fish and Wildlife, Vermont Fish and Wildlife, and with other state agencies throughout New England, those methods can vary a little bit based on the size of the stream, and but we're still kind of aiming for that 200 pieces of wood per mile when we're doing large wood restoration like this. And essentially, it's in all forms, it's putting the large wood back into the channel and more fully connecting those riparian and stream systems where they've had that disconnect for the last 150 or so years. In the literature, it's called all sorts of things: large woody debris, large woody material, in-stream large wood habitat. We've basically pared it down to strategic wood addition, because it is very strategic. We are making plans, sometimes very much in situ, but it is not just dropping it and walking away. And some of the benefits that we're getting from this is that we see great mesohabitat diversity. It improves the sediment transport and the sediment sorting around these installations. And depending on the forest type and the water quality in the stream already, we can see really some pretty significant changes in macroinvertebrate populations as well. So in the set of photos here, you can kind of see from, just quick snapshots of start to finish, just before we do implementation, right after we've completed implementation of a structure, and then this one is about a year later, maybe a little bit less. So these are all from one of our streams in Western Massachusetts. And the way that we do this is basically what we call a modified chop and grip method. So chop and drop is kind of what I think a lot of people end up calling it. We use small teams and a lot of hand tools. That way we can move pretty quickly through a stream area. We can move very lightly on the landscape, and largely employing, obviously, chainsaws and skilled sawyers to directionally fell trees from the surrounding forest into the channel. When we need to, we also use a grip hoist to really shift and move some of those trees around. And that way we can really increase our stability of structures. We're always working with the stream's natural features. We very much plan around infrastructure. Going back to Alex's video of the failing culvert that was caused mostly by a debris jam, we give lots of space, about 500 feet as a minimum, to any kind of downstream infrastructure, whether that is a culvert or a bridge. But it also then really plays to why those upsized culverts are really important is, if it's properly sized and is letting the stream act the way that it needs to, and everything that is in a stream moving through the stream as it needs to, then large wood shouldn't be the obstruction problem that it is. when we're building these, we very much focus on building from the bottom up. We keep it messy. That is one of the hardest things to teach when we are working with new contractors is, you know, keeping structures really messy, making them as long as possible. And there are also some things that we definitely avoid when we are doing this work. We don't like to cut any kinds of bank trees. They're doing their own very important work within the stream system. And we also avoid cutting any kind of wildlife trees. We don't cut any dead standing snags. We keep an eye out for cavity trees, anything that might be really good bat habitat, as that is increasingly important to keep around. Kind of some of more of the details of working with our natural features of the stream to kind of create really stable structures here. And that's not to say that we expect any of our structures to be completely immovable. We expect these to be deformable. We want there to be certain amounts of movement, but we don't want entire, you know, sets of large wood structures to go careening down the stream. So we do, you know, we do try and key these pieces in as well as we can. And also kind of recognizing that it can be really hard to take pictures of large wood in a stream channel and get a clear picture of anything. So especially here, working with the natural bend in the river, the stream flow is kind of coming off of the right side of the picture and then down through the center part here. Really, these natural bends and rivers are wonderful, stable structures. Any flow that's going to come, you know, from that right to left in this picture is just going to be pushing this large log piece further up against the bank, and any kind of you know, downstream forces further are just pushing it into and underneath the downstream bank here. So that's a really solid piece that's got very little chance of moving, maybe a little bit of shifting back and forth, but it's really helping to pin down all of these smaller pieces here. We love to work with undercut banks, and that's really where we can put a grip hoist to good use, and is to, you know, once we drop something in, either pulling it back or pulling it under so that it really kind of fits under those undercut banks, providing a little bit more stability. And obviously this is just the first piece that we put in. We usually add, you know, 3-4 pieces of large wood in any of these given structures that we're putting down. And finally, we love using, you know, the natural features that we have around. Using those bank trees, even small ones, can provide an amazing amount of stability to pin larger pieces down onto the channel bed. Pinning those between large boulders can do a lot of good. And we really try and focus on the layering of structures. Wood has a purpose at every level. You know, this is a really great example of, this was a very low water year that we put these in. So it's really hard to see how much they're going to be touching the water during different types of flows. So keeping it, if you can't get it into the active, into, you know, the flow that is currently there in the stream, at least getting it into the active bankful channel. So that way, you know, that even during the spring freshet, the 2-year storm, they're going to be engaging with the flow. They're going to be, you know, doing some kind of work with the sediment, with the, you know, creating scour, all that fun stuff. And so we kind of start with the small pieces, get those down as low as we can into the channel, and then layer on those larger pieces, always ending with kind of our largest key piece of wood that kind of fits on top, pins everything down, creates that extra level of stability. Those are also usually the pieces that span from the stream channel onto the floodplain or out onto the banks. That has their its own good purpose. It helps kind of redirect some of the flow out onto the floodplain, really re-engages that. Having large wood fallen onto floodplains is, you know, beneficial to all sorts of salamanders, amphibians, turtles, things like that, that are also within the area. So it's got a lot of added value to those. Every few structures, we also like to add strainer trees. And those are just, you know, we find a really large tree and, you know, it's not one of the pieces that's actually going to be in the channel. It's going to be sitting up kind of over the banks. And that way, if there is a large storm and something, if a lot of wood does start to mobilize, those strainer trees are there to kind of, to catch things and to, you know, settle them out. They become another potential area for a natural wood installation to form on its own. But also, again, protecting downstream structures, whether large wood or anything man-made. We like to vary the tree types as much as possible when we're creating these installations. That, of course, depends very much on the type of forest that we're working in. And one of the important things that, I really try and focus on when I'm putting these structures in is spreading out where the trees are coming from. So some from each bank, some from upstream, downstream, coming in from different directions. And that really helps to retain as much of the canopy as possible and keep that shading really good across or over the stream. It wouldn't be quite as good to, if there was a cluster of 3 or 4 trees all together and we dropped all of them at once. That's opening up one of those larger sections of the canopy there. Whereas a tree kind of here and there spread out, the surrounding canopy will really fill in pretty quickly and fill those pockets back in to help shade out. And then we run into more and more issues where there are agricultural fields where we don't have riparian areas to cut from. And so that's where we've really been expanding into our Beaver Dam Analogs and our coast-assisted log jams. And this example stream here, where we're working with Beaver Dam Analogs just this past year, is a bit of a unique case. Maybe it's not as unique as I think it is, but basically, so we've got this farm road here. On the other side of that is where the stream channel originally was. During a large storm, the stream channel got blocked, and a volst took out the farm road here and cut through the agricultural field. Being an ag field, it didn't really have the substrate necessary to become a stream. So during most times of year, the stream channel the stream flow would go subsurface through here, separating basically about 1.5 miles of really nicely forested Coldwater stream upstream from a very, healthy population of brook trout downstream of this agricultural field. So part of what we were looking to do here with these Beaver Dam Analogs is basically to slow the water down when water is flowing through here, to slow the water down enough to build up that silt cap necessary to keep the water above the surface of the channel, or really in the channel bed. So this picture was taken in August, this one in September after we'd completed the work. And so this was just this past February during the spring thaw here. And already you can see it's retaining a lot of leaf litter. It's starting to retain a lot of those vines. A little harder to see when it's smaller here, but we're getting a lot more fine sediments. And the farmer who lives on the property has even said that, just anecdotally so far, he's noticed that the water does stay in the stream for longer. So I think it is surprisingly already starting to have an effect. We've only completed about 1,000 feet of this work last year. We'll be continuing with another 2,000 feet of this work through the rest of the farm field this coming summer. And basically, since we don't have riparian areas to cut from here, we're actually taking the wood from the surrounding forested areas that are still on the property, bringing those over and implementing here with a plan that, yes, this will be, planted out working with the local conservation district. And so that it will eventually become a better brook trout stream. But first, really trying to reconnect the two areas we've got to work with. And really what we've been finding, the more we do this work and the more partners that we've been engaging with this work, is the number of co-benefits that we're getting from these. So the flood resilience, floodplain connectivity from this stream in Massachusetts. This was actually, we implemented this, and this picture was taken 2 days later because of a flash flood that came down last September over Western Massachusetts. And so we're already getting, you can see some of the pieces of large wood that are already fully submerged. These were some of our bank strainers here that are sitting up on the top of bank, and we're already getting water out beyond the bank full heights here. So already getting that engagement, already doing some of that really good work on even on fresh installations. It has an abundance of water quality improvements. We're retaining sediments higher up in the watershed. There are potential benefits for ruffed grouse and woodcock habitat. Apparently, ruffed grouse and woodcock really like these kind of wet edges, especially in the springtime. Having large wood structures in streams also is apparently a favorite habitat for overwintering wood turtles. There's been some initial conversations that it might even be providing potential mussel habitat, depending on the size of the stream and where they are in the watershed. But it's the more that we do it, the more that it seems to have an abundance of benefits for lots of species. And so kind of a zoomed out map of New England where we've been doing this work for about past 7 years or so. Got about 30 miles of large wood habitat across Vermont, 15 miles or so in New Hampshire. We've only just started to do this work in Massachusetts and in Maine. So just a couple miles here and there, but we were recently awarded an NRCS RCPP award that is focused on strategic wood addition on private lands, which should help push an additional 60 miles over the next 3 years. And that covers Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And then specifically of note, between some of Trout Unlimited's work up in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont and Vermont Fish and Wildlife's efforts in the same area, together we've been able to accomplish about 50 miles of habitat work within the Northeast Kingdom, mostly within the Nulhegan watershed. So it's kind of starting to pick up speed. It's really been great to see, and hopefully we'll continue to see the benefits of this as we go. And that's it for my presentation. So I think hopefully we've got some time for questions before it's shed.
We do, Erin. Thank you. That was great. And I failed to mention, but Erin leads the habitat restoration connectivity work in Vermont, Western Mass, and Western New Hampshire. So thanks again. Yeah, any questions for Erin? Yeah.
Thanks, Erin. Excuse me. I was just curious, do you have any permitting requirements or issues to do this type of work? Is it case by case or on a continual basis?
So it varies obviously by state, but there is always permits to go through. Vermont, we have the general stream alteration permit. New Hampshire has permitting requirements through DES. All of these, except for the very smallest kind of sections that we're doing, generally we try and aim, just for our own kind of cost efficiency, we aim to do about a half mile or more on any given property, which, given the amount of trees that we're dropping, triggers Army Corps review as well. But so far we haven't had really any kind of pushback on this. Sometimes when we're introducing it for the first time into a state, it can take a little additional explanation, a couple more site visits. But once it kind of gets a little bit more common, then it's been progressively easier to kind of roll out permits through it.
And just to build on that, do you generally try to avoid dropping trees close to culverts or road crossings? Or is that a non-issue?
Yeah, it's a lot easier when we are away from culverts. Generally speaking, we will give culverts or bridges, any kind of infrastructure, about 500 feet. If there's a culvert downstream, we'll give about 500 feet of upstream space before we drop our first installation. And then we'll usually put 1 or 2 strainers at the very downstream end to make sure that, or can't make sure of anything, but to best protect as possible any kind of downstream infrastructure.
Thank you.
Oh, Brendan.
Some of our freestone streams in West Virginia, they keep really good thermal conditions throughout the summer, sometimes because they go subsurface for a while and there's kind of like an insulatory influence to those. And I noticed the one Beaver analog system that you all developed to try to make the substrate a little bit more impervious, was daylighted. Did you see any issues with increased water temperatures downstream due to your beneficial habitat effects upstream from trying to keep the water above ground, but in contact with sun radiation?
That's a really good question. And so far, so that was last August and September. We haven't had a full summer afterwards to kind of monitor. We do have temperature loggers out there. We're actually also putting in several piezometers on either side to kind of see how that's affecting the ground table or groundwater table in general. So we'll see how it affects the temperature over the next year or so.
Great, thanks. Last question, yeah,
One
John.
final, real quick. Any plans to take this further south? I know I've got a landowner in Rappahannock County that's interested in doing this, and he's having problems with permitting requirements and sort of getting past institutional blockage of this is really new, we don't know what to do about it, and kind of mentality.
So I know that my other TU counterparts in other states are also doing this work to a certain extent. So Dustin, Jeff Wright, I know there's some others. I don't think Pennsylvania's quite picked it up yet. But yeah, so I mean, where there's regional TU folks nearby, we're always happy to help.
Great. Thank you, Erin. Fantastic.